Hi, I'm Kesenya from Guiding Star with Kesenya. Thanks so much for joining me for this special series all about Saturn and his transits through each of the houses in the horoscope. Some of you might be familiar with a video I've done in the past all about Saturn and his transit through the sign of Aquarius and where that's going to fall for each sign. This video series may be a little similar to that. We might cover similar topics of information. But there will also be more depth in this series, so I thank you for joining me for this ongoing series throughout this autumn. Can I also just say I would be so honoured if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel and support the work that I do here in growing the knowledge of astrology throughout Australia and the world. So what is Saturn, first of all? Saturn is the seventh planet out from the Sun, when we include the Sun in this counting astrologically. Saturn is also the last of the visible planets that we can see with the naked eye in the sky at night. Beyond Saturn, to see Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, we need a telescope. And so it's considered in ancient astrology that Saturn is the planet that actually correlate, the final frontier, if you like, that correlates to our visible earthly reality, the manifested reality on planet Earth in this incarnation. Beyond that, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto all have correlations to our inner self, our psyche, our past lives, our wounds, our personal issues, and the way we think about things and the way we integrate things into our lives. So they are very psychological energies, whereas up until Saturn, we have both psychological things happening from those planets, but also material manifestation happening from the planets that we can see. It's an old Hermetic principle, which is called as above, so below, as without, so within. What we see in the sky above us is reflected in our reality on the earth. And the old principle taken further is also what is going on energetically within our soul and our psyche is also reflected on the outer in our earthly life as well. So Saturn, being the furthest planet out as a material planet, as a planet of manifestation, governs most strongly what happens on planet Earth, and for our individual journeys as well. And the reason that is that the further out you go with the planets, the more impact that they have on our lives here on Earth. That might seem a little bit odd. We might ordinarily think that the closer the planet, the greater impact it would have on us. Therefore, Venus should be the most impactful planet of all. But that's not the case in astrology, and it's to do with the time and the speed of a particular planet. With Saturn, its movement is so slow that the energy has time to build and therefore really pack a punch. Where Venus, or the moon if you want, for example, as well, they whiz around the astrological chart very quickly. The moon goes around in 1 month. Venus goes around in approximately, give or take, a year, depending on whether she goes retrograde or not. But Saturn takes 30 years to do a cycle of the astrological chart, and therefore the energy has a lot of time to accumulate in one spot, and therefore we feel the impact most strongly. Saturn, as with all planets, has things that it rules, things that it governs in this earthly reality that we experience. Saturn rules over structures, organizations, hierarchies, governments, regulations and rules. Saturn is also known as Father Time. He governs time here on planet Earth. There are some realms where time doesn't matter. Time is immaterial. But here on planet Earth, we are governed by time as a spirit being manifested into human material form. We are governed by time, and Saturn is the master of time. Saturn also represents things like responsibility, duty, hard work, maturity, perseverance, and endurance in life. These are all actually really great things, and we tend to receive the blessing of these Saturn positive qualities when we start getting into our mid to late 30s. That's when Saturn matures in Vedic astrology, he reaches his maturation. And when he reaches his maturation, essentially, we learn how to carry our burdens in life. And everyone at some point needs to learn that lesson. Certainly by the age of 35, 36, when Saturn matures, we step into our full adulthood. We're no longer young adults, we're no longer children, we have fully reached maturity, and hopefully, if we're manifesting at a high level, we've learned how to carry our burdens. Saturn represents structures, as I said, but also traditions. He is the master of the legacy we want to leave behind as well. He has a connection with the 10th house in astrology, which is all about legacy that we want to leave for those who come after us. He also has a connection to authority figures and those in authority over us. Saturn, on the more negative side of his energy, rules restriction and blockage, fear, holding things back, keeping things from us, and starving us of the things we like, but also equally starving us of the negative things in life if he is making a particular aspect in our natal chart. In astrology, Saturn is the ruler of two signs traditionally. The sign of Capricorn mainly, and then in traditional astrology, the sign of Aquarius. In modern astrology, Uranus is considered to be the ruler of the sign of Aquarius. But in traditional astrology, Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. In archetypal astrology, Saturn is seen as the boss figure, the CEO. Because I like things to be a bit lighter and a bit more fun, I kind of envisage Saturn as kind of the head of control in the Get Smart series. If you're familiar with the chief, he's managing all these bumbling idiots all around him trying to catch the bad guys. And here is the chief just trying to keep everything under control, managed, well organized, well structured, and adhering to what needs to happen and the rules and principles of control in the series Get Smart. But he's still likable. A lot of people will paint Saturn to be the boogeyman of the horoscope. He's out to get you. He makes life tough. He's negative. And certainly some streams of astrology see him as the great malefic. I kind of liken him instead to the great father figure in the sky. If you imagine a father who's, his daughter or son is 16 and they're about to go out to a party, and dad, the father figure, is sitting there and as they run out the front door and says, "Hang on, what time are you going to be home? Where are you going? I want the phone number of the place where you're going to be. Are there going to be any other adults at the party? You've got to do things properly, by the book. There's no being silly, and I want you home by 10 o'clock. And the children are like, "Oh, Dad." But Dad's strict and firm and doesn't budge an inch. He sets boundaries. He says, "No way, home by 10 o'clock. You're not going to be one of those children who's out running around the streets at all hours of the night, getting up to no good." So he is this protector, father figure energy, authority figure energy in the horoscope. Now, sometimes we see people manifesting Saturn in a very negative way. They are the authority figure with abuse and violence and control. Now, often that would indicate a connection with Mars in a chart if that's how it was playing out. But then there are other people who manifest beautiful Saturn energy that's benevolent. That is, lots of boundaries, lots of regulations and rules, but it's for your greater good. It's for your upliftment. It's for the betterment of yourself, society, humanity, whatever. So there are many ways Saturn can manifest, but he is always the energy of this protector father figure. Even in karmic astrology, Saturn represents our fears that we have from previous incarnations. For example, if you happen to fall off, and many people who've had readings with me will have heard this analogy, if you happen to in a past life fall off the Grand Canyon to plummet to your death, and then you reincarnate and you've got this fear of heights you can't explain, that's Saturn putting protective boundaries of fear in place so that you don't go and fall off the Grand Canyon again and plummet to your death in the next life. So he is very much about our psychic protection or karmic protection, and sometimes people see him as a representation of karmic blockage, based on the hurts and the wounds and the fears we've experienced in past incarnations. According to the reading I've done, Saturn rules the gemstone qualities of obsidian, also tourmaline and hematite, the heavy black stones that are, in the case of tourmaline especially, particularly good at absorbing energy. Saturn also correlates to the color brown, which is why for this series I'm dressing in very autumnal tones of brown. And as a ruler of the earth sign of Capricorn, Saturn is a very earthy type of planet, and it has a lot of earth energy about him. And so one of the remedies that we can offer for any Saturn troubled times is to be in nature or to walk barefoot on the earth. Saturn also rules rocks and gravelly soil and rocky places. Isolated places do come under Saturn's governance occasionally as well. So to be in those places is actually to be in a Saturnian environment, or to live in a garden full of rocks or a house that's made of stone is a very Saturnian environment to live in. Saturn also governs things like minimalism and restraint and restriction. If we were to have Saturn sitting permanently in our first house, then we might find that our body was restricted in some way, either through our size is restricted, or our height. So either our outward expression or our upward expression would be restricted. Saturn would be affecting our body in that way. So he rules restriction and restraint. So that's a little, in a nutshell, picture of what Saturn as a planet represents. Now we're going to dive into what it means to have Saturn transiting through the houses. But first, let's start with an explanation of how to assess where Saturn is according to whole sign astrology by transit. So how do we know if we have Saturn transiting our second house? Well, I use whole sign astrology, and that means that every sign represents a house. So you might be born with, say, your rising sign as the sign of Capricorn, for example. Let's make that visible on my little board here. If you, this is only an example, you could have any of the 12 signs as your rising sign, the sign rising on the eastern horizon at the moment you were born. So there we would have, say, Capricorn as the rising sign, and that would be your first house. The rising sign, basically in whole sign astrology, is your first house. So therefore, that would make, if you were Capricorn, Aquarius, the whole sign of Aquarius, as your second house. The whole sign of Pisces as your third house, and so on around all the 12 houses. It's as simple as that. It's an easy system, but it's so accurate and the most ancient of systems, actually. So I love using the whole sign system. Now, because in this example we have Capricorn as the rising sign, and we are entering into a period, as I'm recording this, when the planet Saturn is about to move into Aquarius. This means if you're Capricorn rising, for the next roughly 2.5 years ahead, you're going to have Saturn in your second house, and this video will be very pertinent to you. But if down the track, say in another, 5 or 6 years, you happen to be watching this video for the information, because the information will be the same regardless of what time, what year you happen to be watching this in. You'll just need to look for where Saturn falls, and you can do that by going to an app like planetwatcher.com or something similar. See what sign Saturn happens to be sitting in, and find out if you know what your rising sign is, then you will have all the details you'll need to work out whereabouts Saturn, what house Saturn is transiting in your chart. So, in a couple of years' time, we're going to have Saturn moving through the sign of Pisces. And therefore, if you look at the wheel chart, you can figure it out. That means for Aquarius rising people, Saturn will be in their second house. Then a couple of years later, Saturn will move into Aries. So if you're Pisces rising like I am, then you're going to have Saturn in your second house when that occurs. So that's how we can figure out whether we're having a transit of Saturn to our second house. And it'll happen for everyone every roughly 30 years, give or take, that we have this transit of Saturn through our second house. Because Saturn takes 30 years approximately to go around the whole horoscope. So that, I hope that helps clear up whether this applies to you or not, whatever time in history you happen to be watching this video. But for the purposes of illustration, we're going to use Capricorn as the rising sign and Saturn being in Aquarius as the second house transit for this illustration. Saturn is in a sign for roughly 2.5 years at a time. Now, like I said, there's a bit of give and take there. We're coming up to the 3-year mark for Saturn being in the sign of Capricorn as I record this. And he's in the intermediary year where he's going to be half in Aquarius and half in Capricorn. But all up, it roughly works out to around 2.5 years that he spends in any given sign. So I thought I'd start with the Hindu system of assessment for when Saturn is transiting through the second house. So I want to start by looking at the Hindu assessment system regarding Saturn transiting through the second house in somebody's chart. Now, in Hindu astrology, the second house represents education, it represents family, and it represents money. So this is a little different to the Western system. We're going to look at both systems in this video. Saturn in the Vedic Hindu system is considered to be a malefic planet. As I started out by saying, my interpretation of Saturn as a malefic planet is a little different to that. I don't see him as the boogeyman, someone out to get you, even though my Saturn is rubbish in my own personal chart. I have only felt a great respect for Saturn and what he does and his purpose and intent in our lives. But according to the Hindu system, the Saturn transit through the second house can therefore bring, because he's a malefic planet, can bring trouble with family, bring difficulty earning money and creating money and accumulating possessions, and can bring hardships with education. So they're the things that are ruled by the second house, generally speaking, in the Vedic system, and Saturn being there by transit for 2.5 years can bring troubles to those realms of life. Now, when Saturn is in the second house, he is also aspecting in the Vedic system, not Western aspects, but in the Vedic system, he's aspecting the 4th house, the 8th house, and the 11th house as well. And so this will then bring his malefic aspects or malefic characteristics to the 8th, the 11th, and the 4th house also. So the 4th house might bring blockage with regard to housing, difficulties with your home, difficulties with your mother, difficulties in attaining the comforts of life and the sense of security and stability that we tend to want in life. There can also be troubles with your car throughout this 2.5 year period as well, according to the Hindu system. The 8th house transit of Saturn, aspect from Saturn's transit of the second house can bring losses and struggles with wills. So contentiousness with wills, maybe some fighting over an inheritance, that sort of thing. Problems with insurances or need to, call on your insurance company to pay for blah, blah, blah. And problems with reproduction as well. So the difficulty conceiving, or sometimes we might see, problems with the reproductive organs from this aspect of Saturn to the 8th house. There can also be difficulties in learning as well, and the ability to comprehend. Saturn's aspect to the 11th house in the Hindu system here can mean we can clash with our friends. We might even have experienced some loss of friendship or some angst or animosity with friends in some way. It's going to be harder to fulfill your dreams according to the Hindu interpretation, and any side ventures that we undertake, like maybe we've got a little market stall running on the side and we work at the bank the rest of the time. Side ventures are going to be harder to get off the ground, more difficult to get going, and more difficult to make money from. So they don't give much reward. So that's really, in a very brief nutshell, the Vedic interpretation of Saturn's transit of the second house and where it might be affecting us and how we might be experiencing it. Now I want to get into the Western system, which is the system I tend to prefer to use when looking at transits, but I'm just presenting all the information for you to make your own informed decision about how this transit might be affecting your life. So when we have Saturn transiting the second house, it means there's a concentration of energy on second house things. And Saturn is our earthly reality, the experiences we have on this earthly plane, not the spiritual planes, not the ethereal planes, not the inner psychological side of our lives, but the actual physical experiences that we have on planet Earth. And this is why people can get very cranky at Saturn, because we want our earthly experiences to be easy to manifest with joy and purpose and happiness. And of course, life on planet Earth is very, very mixed. I mean, the Buddhists believe in samsara, where, this is not the case, that life is all happy, happy, joy, joy. Far from it. So Saturn governing our earthly material reality is actually, in that sense, correlating to samsara, and we all experience a sense of suffering in some way, shape or form in life, and part of our purpose is to transcend the suffering. So Saturn in the earthly plane transiting through the second house and causing effects in second house realms of our life is what we're going to see quite strongly in our physical reality when we're having this transit. So the second house in Western and ancient astrology, Hellenistic astrology, it governs things like wealth, possessions, also our self-esteem and self-worth. Basically, the external value system that we have. What do we value in our immediate tangible vicinity? Do we have fine sheets and bed linen and lovely food and a closet full of shoes or something like that? Or or are our values externally different? Do we value recycled goods and living gently on the planet and so forth instead? Our external values are seen by the second house, and our internal values, how we value ourself and our existence and our movement through this incarnation. The first house represents our movement through life, our mission, our journey, our actual process of living, and the second house rules what we value about ourselves and this and what we want to sort of embody values-wise in this journey through life. So it's things like self-worth, what we feel is worthwhile endeavors to undertake in this lifetime, where we feel our internal values are. Say if you're invested in ecologically sustainable living, then that your values system internally goes to the values of ecologically sustainable living that then manifests in ecologically sustainable living on the external plane as well. So there's this correlation between internal and external value systems seen from the second house. So after we've experienced a 2.5-year period when Saturn has been transiting the first house, that we've sort of taken a big look at our self-definition. And we've looked at, who we are on this planet, how we're expressing, how the world sees us, our personality, how we project to the world, and we've redefined that, we've restructured that, we've reshaped that. Now Saturn's transit to the second house of our chart is going to redefine our physical structures, how we make money. Where are our resources coming from that support our journey? What are our value systems around resources and around internal value systems that therefore affect our external resources as well? The second house is anything that supports, in a manifested kind of way, values and physical tangible goods that support our journey through life. So in that sense, this is where the restructuring is going to occur from Saturn's transit. A redefinition is going to take place over the next 2.5 years. Now, it's not going to happen like that, because Saturn is not an instantaneous worker. That's the job of Uranus. Saturn will bring things in slowly, steadily, surely, and the change will happen over the course of this 2.5-year period. Now that he's moving out of the first house, any sort of personal inattention with how we're projecting to the world and our personality and so forth, that leaves now, that eases off now. We know who we are, we know what we want our life to look like and what we want our image to be to the world now. We've redefined that, restructured that, okay, we're good to go. So that subsides and the focus now moves to external things. Where are you living? What does that look like? What's your house look like? What's your furniture like? What's your clothing like? What's the food you're eating like? There is a real sort of process of change that occurs to those things. Making money which Saturn actually likes to make money. Saturn is a very materially oriented planet. And so having money is a big part of what he's all about. And also creating a practical focus now on your own personal security and safety in life is paramount. You're going to be very concerned with those things, making money, securing up your physical reality for the future, and you're going to be very concerned with making things stable and secure. The second house has an association with the sign of Taurus, and Taurus is very steady, very calm, very material, in the earthly plane, and therefore very much about keeping stability, security, and safety. A bit of balance too in Taurus. As a key, and the second house is like that as well. We're going to also be focused on issues regarding confidence, our self-confidence. But this isn't essentially the house of self-confidence per se. We see that kind of in the fifth house a little more. But it does have those connotations, as I said, to the self-worth that we possess, how we value our existence on this plane, and our self-worth does tie in. I mean, there's no denying it. It does tie in to how much confidence that we have. So we may well be directed to restructure that over this coming 2.5 year period. And self-love. So there might be some issues that really prod you, poke you, and challenge you regarding how much do you value yourself? How much do you think you're worth? You might get lots of incidents popping up in your experience that challenge you to think about this and redirect this and make changes to your self-worth and your self-value. So let's give an example. You might be in a job where the boss has just kept, you do a brilliant job, you work so hard, you're there overtime all the time, and the boss still niggles at you and says, not good enough. Not happy with what you've done. Do it again. I want you to stay later. I want you to work later. You've got to attend this meeting and that meeting, and no, you won't get remunerated for it. And you're just like, I'm worth more than this. I have studied and got a master's degree and I know my stuff, and yet I still keep getting put down and treated like crap. Enough. My self-worth says time for this to change. And so you start looking for other jobs, or you start thinking about going out on your own and becoming a consultant or something. So it's these kinds of experiences that we might think, oh my God, just enough already. But really they're designed. There is purpose behind them, designed to make you reassess, where's the money coming from? Are you getting what you're worth financially? Are you being appreciated the way you should be appreciated? In your home, in your community, in your workplace? Is your self-worth being honored? And this is the real calling card of Saturn in the second house that you will need to assess. And like I said, circumstances will arise where you're going to have to go deep with that and prod you, almost kick your butt into that sort of difficult circumstance to make you pay attention and start to value yourself a little more. So if you're entering into this transit period, or you're going through this transit of the Saturn in the second house, I want to ask you, what are your beliefs around your self-worth? Do you deserve to be getting a higher paycheck? Do you deserve to be in a position of more authority, more power? What are your beliefs around what you deserve in life? Do you think that you deserve to be in poverty? Do you think that you deserve to be struggling throughout life? These are the questions that we must sift through and evaluate, go internally with during a Saturn transit of the second house. And because Saturn rules responsibility and duty and hard work, we actually need to take responsibility for our self-worth. We are the ones that need to instigate any changes that need to be made to get what we deserve, to receive our actual value. So we are going to have to be the ones that say to our boss, you know what, shove your job. I am going out on my own as a consultant, and I'm taking all my clients with me. We are the ones who have to sort of stand up, put boundaries in place if needed, make changes where needed, and restructure and redefine our sense of self-worth, and therefore where our external possessions and valuables and money is coming from, in correlation with our sense of value in the world. So a real reassessment process regarding that is undertaking, and you have to take responsibility for your own sense of self-worth and self-value in the world. No more blaming. No more I'm a victim here and I can't get a better job and I'm not good enough, and no more of that. You're going to be called now with this transit to take responsibility for your own value and worth in this earthly experience that you're having. Some good news with this transit is that people who have a healthy and strong Saturn in their natal chart, that might look like, Saturn in its sign of exaltation like Libra, or Saturn in its own sign, Capricorn or Aquarius, or Saturn with good aspects, supportive helping aspects to it, something like that. If you've got a strong and healthy Saturn in your chart, you can actually make a lot of money during this transit, because Saturn is this materially manifesting planet. So this can be very exciting if you happen to have a healthy, well buoyed up Saturn in your chart. What must be underlined though with this is that Saturn will only bring money if you use Saturn principles to achieve it. This means following the rules, doing the hard work, being dutiful, being diligent, persevering and enduring, and being patient with regard to making money. It doesn't mean that you're going to go and lay, $1,000 on the horses and come home, and a billionaire or something. Like, it's not going to work like that with Saturn in the second house. It's going to happen through the Saturn process of patience and diligence. So do be prepared for that. Do have in your mind, I will continue to work hard. I must do this if I'm to achieve the positive outcomes that I'm capable of with my Saturn placement. People who don't actually have much of a concept of material needs, or they're not wise with their material circumstances in life, can actually really suffer when Saturn transits the second house. So this is the flip side, that people with strong Saturn, people who are responsible and dutiful in everyday life, people who carry those higher qualities of Saturn, people who are, structure everything well and have good routines and are very diligent and patient and persevering with life in general. They pay their bills on time. They have a good approach to material reality. People with strong Saturn tend to have that. But people with the opposite, on the flip side, people who are not very materially responsible, people who don't manage their money well, people who are flippant and sort of throw money around left, right and center without much consideration and thought, can actually really suffer during Saturn's transit of the second house. They're going to end up with some pretty hefty bills now, more debts. The costs can really pile up. Now, I don't care whether you've got $2 in the bank or $2 million in the bank. What you've got doesn't matter. It's your attitude to money that matters in this transit. And if your attitude to money is whatever, I can go and buy this, that, and the other, and it doesn't matter, and I don't care how it affects other people, and I'm just going to throw money at this lost cause left, right, and center. Well, you will really suffer when Saturn goes through your second house, because your value system and your attitude to money needs some restructuring, needs some redefining. So in the beginning of this Saturn transit to the second house, do look deeply at how you value yourself and how you value your resources on planet Earth. If you can look at yourself and detach and not be too judgy about things, if you can look at yourself and say, well, you know what, I am actually a bit immature with money. I'm out partying 5 nights a week and spending hundreds of dollars on alcohol, or even I'm throwing money after a court case that I know I won't win, but my ego and pride is getting in the way. Or it could be anything. I have this fetish for shoes and I just can't stop buying them, even though I can't afford to eat this week. I keep buying shoes. If your approach to money is immature and not very responsible, Saturn will call you to task during this transit. So you really must, if you're entering into this transit period, you must assess yourself in a realistic manner. How do I need to mature my approach to money? How do I need to act with more responsibility, more wisdom, and more sensible approach to resources and money and values in the world? And this goes on a large scale as well as a small scale. How are we treating the planet? How are we, creating sustainable resources for the long-term future as a collective on the planet? How lightly are we treading on this beautiful, precious earth that must be honored and respected? These kinds of questions come up as well in the large scale. Are we acting maturely in that regard, or are we acting immaturely in that regard? Do we just throw our Coke bottle in the street instead of, putting it in the recycling? Everything of that nature regarding resources of the earth, resources for living, for everybody as well as us as individuals, will be called to account right now during this Saturn transit. As I alluded to earlier, security is also a big driver at this time as well. You're going to need to employ Saturn attitudes to attain security as well. Saturn, dutiful approach and responsible approach and hardworking, enduring approach to your work in order to create a sense of security and stability for your life. So, work towards those higher Saturn qualities, those beautiful Saturn qualities that you can bring blessing of security and stability into your life now. As I said, no gambling. Try and avoid financial risk-taking. Big spending is kind of a no-no during Saturn's 2.5-year transit here. So it's not really the time for going and buying, some extra holiday house down, in an exotic location. If you really can't afford it, do not do that. Watch your money. Thriftiness is actually what we advise during Saturn's transit to the second house. And, if you're not used to being thrifty, if you're not used to being wise with money, it can be a bit of a challenge. But it's better to spend 2.5 years being thrifty, being wise, being sensible, than to, continue on with a frivolous way of living and then suffer for the next 30 years because of it. Better to spend 2.5 years working hard at creating security for yourself than spend 30 years sort of trying to catch up for your frivolousness during this time. This is also a time for restructuring what you're getting. So if you run your own business, this is an appropriate time for reassessing, am I getting what I'm worth? And you might need to make changes to what you're charging for, say in my case, what you're charging for readings, what you're charging for webinars, what you're charging for your consultancy services. It's a time for reviewing and bringing into line with your self-worth and self-value what you're charging for your time, your energy, your effort. Now, sudden reversals in fortune are not often seen with Saturn's transit through this part of the chart unless Uranus is doing something, because Uranus is sudden change, and if Uranus is making aspects to the second house, that can bring sudden change and alteration to financial circumstances. But Saturn in and of himself does not bring sudden changes to your financial circumstances. As I've said, more a steady, one foot in front of the other approach to and following the rules and keeping things within the boundaries of what you know is right and proper is a much better approach to making money now, and it will happen over time. So you can, if you're in really difficult circumstances at the beginning of this transit, through hard work, through perseverance, through one foot in front of the other and keeping on, you can actually change your financial circumstances significantly by the end of this transit. One of the good things about you can call it a good thing, is Saturn's transit through any house in the horoscope, is that after the 2.5 years is up, if we have worked hard, if we have been diligent, if we have persevered around the things represented by that house, then when Saturn leaves, it's like, I can breathe again. Finally, the money comes flowing in. I'm feeling more profitable. I feel more self-worth and self-value. If we've done the work, we receive the rewards. That's just the basic premise for Saturn. If we do the hard work, then we receive the karmic harvest for what we've sown. So I'd encourage you, if you're beginning this transit, do the hard work, be thrifty, be persevering, work hard at developing financial resources and self-worth, and you will see the results for this most beautifully in 2.5 years. Don't give up, persevere even when it feels tough to do so. So in a nutshell, there's a big focus on connections between self-worth, inner values, and outer external financial and tangible world experiences right now. There's a connection between self-worth and appropriate remuneration in the material realm right now. So this is where you've got to focus your attention. Also, when we've got this transit going on, looking for validation from the external world is a waste of time. This is a time when we are, don't expect the pay rise. You might get one. I'm not saying you won't, but don't go expecting it. Don't be looking for the financial rewards from outside during this time, because Saturn is less likely to give those now and more likely to give those sorts of things like a pay rise or a promotion or something. Those sorts of things are more likely to come at the end of this 2.5 year period of diligent hard work. Okay, so don't go expecting it. Don't go looking for validation and self-approval and getting your self-worth from external sources during Saturn's transit here. Instead, look to get what you deserve from what you believe you should have, what your inner self-worth says you are worthy of. So look there instead of externally during Saturn's transit of the second house, and make the necessary changes to ensure that you are getting what you deserve if you need to, rather than sitting and waiting for the boss to notice what a great job you do. It may never happen, and you are much better off, creating your external, using your internal value system about how you see yourself to create your external resource structure now with this transit. So I hope this video has proved helpful to you if you're going through this period in time, and given you some ideas for how you can best deal with this energy and approach this energy unfolding in your life for the next 2.5 years. Be blessed. I hope it is a time when you receive the reward from karmic Saturn that you deserve for the hard work you do.